November 1954, Hollywood, California. Ella Fitzgerald stood outside the Mocambo nightclub on Sunset Boulevard, staring at a door she would never be allowed to walk through. She was the greatest jazz singer in the world. She had a voice that could make angels weep. Critics called her a genius. Other musicians called her the First Lady of Song. But none of that mattered, because Ella Fitzgerald was black. And the Mocambo nightclub, one of the most prestigious venues in Hollywood, had a strict policy. White performers only. White audiences only. Ella had been rejected so many times she'd stopped counting. Her manager had begged every major club in Los Angeles. The answer was always the same: number. She was about to give up. About to accept that her career would be limited to small black clubs in segregated neighborhoods, that she would never reach the audience she deserved. And then, on a cold November afternoon, her phone rang. The voice on the other end said 4 words that would change everything. "This is Marilyn Monroe." Hook, 0:45 to 1:30. If you love discovering the incredible untold stories of how music legends helped each other behind the scenes, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. Because what happened next is one of the most beautiful acts of solidarity in entertainment history. This is not a story about charity. This is not a story about a famous white woman doing a favor for a struggling black artist. This is a story about 2 women who understood what it meant to be underestimated, objectified, and dismissed by an industry that only saw them as products. Marilyn Monroe was considered just a dumb blonde with a pretty face. Ella Fitzgerald was considered just a black singer who would never be mainstream. Both of them were so much more than that. And when Marilyn made one phone call, she didn't just save Ella's career. She changed the entire landscape of American music forever. Act 1. Ella'nın mücadelesi. 1 dakika 30 saniye, 4 dakika. Let me take you back to understand what Ella Fitzgerald was facing in 1954. She had been performing professionally since she was 17 years old. She won the Apollo Theater's amateur night in 1934 when she was just a teenager. Her voice was so extraordinary that grown men cried when they heard her sing. By the early 1950s, Ella had recorded dozens of songs. She had worked with the best musicians in jazz: Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Louis Armstrong. They all knew she was special. But there was a ceiling, an invisible wall she couldn't break through. The biggest venues in America, the clubs where Frank Sinatra performed, where Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. entertained wealthy white audiences. Those clubs would not book Ella Fitzgerald. It didn't matter how talented she was. It didn't matter that other musicians worshipped her. It didn't matter that she could outsing anyone in the country. She was a black woman in the 1950s America. And that meant doors stayed closed. Her manager, Norman Granz, was furious. He would call club after club, venue after venue. He would tell them about Ella's talent, her professionalism, her genius. The answer was always the same. Our clientele wouldn't be comfortable. It's not the right fit. Maybe try the clubs on Central Avenue. The black neighborhood. In 1954, Norman made one last attempt. He called the Mocambo, the most prestigious nightclub in Hollywood. Celebrities went there, movie stars, producers, directors. If you performed at the Mocambo, you had made it. The owner, Charlie Morrison, listened to Norman's pitch. Then he said no. He was polite about it. He said Ella was talented. He said he respected her work. But the Mocambo had an image to maintain. Their audience expected a certain kind of performer. Norman hung up the phone and had to call Ella with the news. She didn't cry. She had been rejected too many times to cry anymore. She just said quietly, "I understand." But she didn't understand. How could she? She was the best singer in the world, and the world wouldn't let her perform. ACT2, Marilyn'in girişi, 400, 630. Now let me tell you about Marilyn Monroe in 1954. She was at the absolute peak of her fame. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and How to Marry a Millionaire had made her the biggest box office draw in Hollywood. But Marilyn had a secret that most people didn't know. She loved jazz. Not the popular music that played on the radio. Not the safe commercial stuff that white audiences consumed. Real jazz. The kind that black musicians created in small clubs. The kind that had soul and pain and truth in every note. Marilyn would sneak into jazz clubs in black neighborhoods, wearing dark sunglasses and a headscarf so she wouldn't be recognized. She would sit in the back and listen. Really listen. And one night, in a small club on Central Avenue, she heard Ella Fitzgerald sing. Marilyn had never heard anything like it in her life. Ella's voice was like an instrument. She could do things with her vocal cords that seemed impossible. She could scream and whisper and laugh and cry all in one phrase. Marilyn sat there with tears running down her face. After the show, she went backstage and introduced herself. Ella couldn't believe Marilyn Monroe was standing in front of her, the biggest movie star in the world, in this tiny club in a black neighborhood. They talked for hours that night. Marilyn told Ella she was the greatest singer she'd ever heard. Ella told Marilyn she loved her movies, that she made her laugh. They became friends, real friends. Not Hollywood friends who smiled at parties and never spoke again. They would call each other on the phone. They would meet for coffee when Marilyn wasn't being followed by photographers. They bonded over something they both understood. The world saw them as objects, pretty things to look at, not real people with thoughts and feelings and talent. Marilyn knew what it felt like to walk into a room and watch men's eyes glaze over, to know they weren't listening to a word she said because they were too busy staring at her body. Ella knew what it felt like to sing her heart out and have white audiences politely applaud, but never truly embrace her because of the color of her skin. They understood each other. Bomba, 3. dakika, 6:30 ile 7:15. So, when Marilyn found out that Ella had been rejected by the Mocambo, she didn't just feel bad. She got angry. Marilyn Monroe picked up her phone and called Charlie Morrison, the owner of the Mocambo nightclub. The same man who had just rejected Ella Fitzgerald. "Charlie, this is Marilyn Monroe," she said. Charlie nearly dropped the phone. Marilyn Monroe was calling him personally. "I hear you're not booking Ella Fitzgerald," Marilyn continued. "I want you to book her. Next week. Primetime slot. Friday and Saturday night." Charlie stammered. "Miss Monroe, I appreciate the call, but—" "Here's my offer," Marilyn interrupted. "You book Ella Fitzgerald, and I will personally sit in the front row every single night she performs. I will bring the biggest stars in Hollywood with me. Photographers will be everywhere. Your club will be in every newspaper in America." There was silence on the other end of the line. "But if you don't book her," Marilyn said, her voice cold now, "I will make sure every person in Hollywood knows that the Mocambo discriminates. And I will never set foot in your club again." Charlie Morrison had a choice to make. Turn down Marilyn Monroe, the biggest star in the world, and risk destroying his club's reputation, or break his own racist policy and book a black performer for the first time in the Mocambo's history. He chose survival. "When can she start?" he asked. "Vi versus Torstidi, Act 3, Gechenen Enilarinden, Yedi Onbesh, on. November 19th, 1954. Opening night at the Mocambo. Ella Fitzgerald stood backstage, her hands shaking. She had performed hundreds of times. She was a professional. She never got nervous. But tonight was different. Tonight, she was stepping onto a stage where black performers had never been allowed. Tonight, the audience would be filled with white Hollywood elites who had never heard her sing before. Tonight, everything could change. Norman Granz, her manager, squeezed her shoulder. "You're going to be magnificent," he whispered. The curtain opened. Ella walked onto the stage, and there, in the front row, exactly as she had promised, sat Marilyn Monroe. She was wearing a white dress that sparkled under the lights. Her platinum blonde hair was perfect. She looked like an angel. And she was smiling at Ella, with so much warmth, so much encouragement, that Ella felt her fear dissolve. Next to Marilyn sat Judy Garland, Frank Sinatra, Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall. Marilyn had kept her promise. She had brought everyone. The flashbulbs were popping everywhere. Photographers were scrambling to capture Marilyn Monroe at the Mocambo. But Marilyn wasn't looking at the cameras. She was looking at Ella. Ella stepped up to the microphone. She opened her mouth, and she sang. She sang like her life depended on it. She sang every emotion she'd ever felt, every rejection, every closed door, every time someone told her she wasn't good enough. She poured it all into her voice. The audience, this room full of wealthy white people who had never heard real jazz before, sat in stunned silence. And then, as Ella hit a note so pure, so perfect, so impossibly beautiful, that it seemed to hang in the air like a prayer, Marilyn Monroe stood up. She started clapping, and one by one the entire audience rose to their feet. They gave Ella Fitzgerald a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Grown men were crying. Women were dabbing their eyes with handkerchiefs. Charlie Morrison, the club owner who had rejected Ella just weeks earlier, stood in the back with his mouth open. He had never seen anything like this. After the show, Ella and Marilyn embraced backstage. "Thank you," Ella whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for giving me this chance." Marilyn held her tight. "You didn't need me to give you anything," she said. "You did this. Your talent did this. I just opened the door. You walked through it, like the queen you are." Actört son resinda ne oldu, on fres on iki alsace. That night at the Mocambo changed everything. Every newspaper in America ran the story. Marilyn Monroe discovers Ella Fitzgerald, Hollywood's new jazz sensation. The phone in Ella's apartment started ringing and didn't stop for weeks. The Copa in New York wanted to book her. The Sands in Las Vegas called. Television producers wanted her on their shows. Within 6 months, Ella Fitzgerald went from being rejected by every major venue to being one of the most sought-after performers in America. She signed a recording contract with Verve Records and began recording the songbook series that would become legendary. Ella Fitzgerald sings the Cole Porter Songbook, the Gershwin Songbook, the Irving Berlin Songbook. These albums made her a household name. White audiences who had never heard of her became devoted fans. She won Grammy Awards, she performed at Carnegie Hall, she sang for presidents, all because Marilyn Monroe made one phone call. But here's what makes this story even more beautiful. Marilyn never took credit for it. She never went on television and talked about how she helped Ella. She never gave interviews about what a good person she was. When journalists asked her about that night at the Mocambo, Marilyn would just smile and say, "I didn't do anything. Ella Fitzgerald is a genius." The world just needed to hear her. Years later, Ella Fitzgerald gave an interview where she finally told the whole story. She said, "Marilyn Monroe was not just a friend. She changed my life. She didn't have to do what she did. She risked her own reputation to help me. I owed her everything." And then Ella said something that still brings tears to my eyes. "Marilyn saw me as a human being when most of the world only saw the color of my skin. That's the gift she gave me. Not the career, not the fame. The gift was being seen." Kapish, duygusal. 12:00, 14:00. Marilyn Monroe died in 1962. Ella Fitzgerald died in 1996. But the friendship they shared, the moment of solidarity they created, lives on forever. This story is important for so many reasons. It's a story about racism and how deeply it infected American culture, about how talented black artists were systematically denied opportunities. It's a story about allyship, about what it means to use your privilege and your power to open doors for others. But most of all, it's a story about two women who refused to be defined by the labels society put on them. Marilyn Monroe was not just a dumb blonde. She was intelligent, thoughtful, and deeply empathetic. Ella Fitzgerald was not just a black singer. She was the greatest vocalist of her generation. And when they found each other, when they recognized the humanity in each other that the world tried to deny, they created something beautiful. Marilyn could have done nothing. She could have felt bad for Ella and moved on with her life. But she didn't. She picked up the phone, she made the call, she used her power for good. And Ella, who could have been bitter about all the doors that had been slammed in her face, chose to respond with grace and gratitude. That night at the Mocambo wasn't just about music. It was about two women saying, "We see each other, we value each other, and we're going to fight for each other." If this story touched your heart, I need you to do something. Subscribe to this channel, share this video with someone who needs to hear this story, and leave a comment telling me about a time when someone opened a door for you, or a time when you opened a door for someone else. Because these stories matter. Kindness matters. Solidarity matters. Using your voice to help others matters. Marilyn and Ella showed us that 70 years ago, and their lesson is just as important today. What did you think of this story? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more incredible untold stories from music history, check out this video next about the day Nina Simone refused to perform until the venue integrated their audience. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.